Okay, so time for an update on the Revenant project. We've been shooting. I've been showing you some get the music off here. I promised you from day one, warts, feathers, and all. Well, we got some warts. The Revenant project, at this point, I think most people would call it a complete failure. We started by bore sighting it days ago, a week ago, and mounting this Bucky's mount with a frozen loophole 36D on it. And I felt that the Bucky's mount and the 36D were essentially bulletproof. So I figured I'm going to go with a bulletproof, epoxy together, frozen scope. The Bucky's mount is, even though it was an unknown quantity to me, it has no moving parts, only flexing parts. There's a part in the back that can move, but essentially there's no hangers, the spring returns are right out front. So I'm trying to bulletproof this thing from the top down. I started by cutting the barrel off and shooting. Now this accomplished a bunch of things. I made some cases. I hammered cases out. I fitted my dies. You have to understand, nothing fit with the new chamber. I took the old chamber, which was set up to, long story, but basically I made the rear of the chamber too small. So in the interim, I ordered another HBR reamer set to my fat butt Allen Wasp specs. I've got a whole series of WSMs and a whole series of 308 size cartridges, 6.5 by 47s, 6 by 47s. I've even got some Creedmoors in the mix there. And they're all opened up at the back to a tremendously wide spec so that there's no click, so that there's no problem. Now the problem with the Revenant is this is one of my first projects that I built off of a die. Minimum Sammy, the chamber's barely bigger than virgin brass, like 2000s. You can fire a case 20 times and it looks like it's never been fired because the tolerances are so tight. The problem is, by that point it's clicking so bad it's almost unshootable. So when I started to resurrect this gun, I'm doing it step by step by step. And I started with cutting the barrel off, and then I ran my new die into the old chamber, and I did it by hand because all I was doing was scratching that chamber out bigger. I thought about single point turning it, but I decided no, I'm going to go ahead and use my new, I think I have 2 barrels chambered by the new HBR reamer, but I've never really fired them for effect. So this is the old Ichabod chamber with the long neck, and I ran the new HBR reamer in just to fatten it out, just to widen it out, just to bring it up to where it'll fit. And then I took my old die that Neil Jones built me back in the day and I destroyed it by running a single point tool up inside of it and recutting that hardened steel die to the new spec, or what I thought was going to be the new spec. So part of this test, I did accomplish some things here. I've said I run a lot of different tests at the same time. There's many different die settings in here, 2 different sizes of dies, because a few of the first groups were set up before I cut the die open. Then I cut the die open. I did about 5 of these with an initial set of cases. Then I went and did a neck turning sequence where I turned a bunch of necks, a whole box of necks, which I've got here somewhere. But when I say turned them, I didn't use them. I just set up enough to use for competition, and I turned this box. I'm not going to bring it up there yet because it doesn't, well, I'll put it up here for later so we can see it. Recut my chambers and started shooting. Well, I always shoot for effect in the sense that I'm testing things. This is not even fire forming groups. There's about 5 groups on here with one set of cases, and then all the rest. There's 32-ish firings on here on these cases. Now, that's not true. 28, because I did a bunch of 2s and 3s. Then a 5, then a 5, then a 5, then a 5. That's a 5. I did a 2. No, I did these 2. I'm not going to go through and explain all this. But here's what happened. I basically started here, and this goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way around to 14. And this is the only reason I'm doing this episode. A long time ago I brought, in fact, I just remembered this. It was this gun. This was the first gun I had built. There was a guy named Del Bishop that wanted to teach me how to shoot. And I would go up and shoot with Del. First time I went to shoot with Del, I brought a bunch of guns, and one of them was this Revenant gun in its original configuration, big old long dog barrel, tight cases. And I never will forget his words, because I went up and was shooting some groups with it, and he looked through his scope and he said, "Man, Al, that gun really wants to shoot." I was shooting 5-shot groups at that time, and a lot of them looked like 2-shot groups. Because I would, some of you'll know what that means, some of you don't. Bullets are going in the same hole, and then the wind and me jerking, and he said, "That gun really wants to shoot." I let him shoot a couple of groups with it, and he shot nice little round holes. That was a long time ago. I shot that gun for a while, shot, and I fought those cases, and I just threw the whole thing away. It's been sitting in the closet. So now I'm bringing it back out. That's why I'm calling it the Revenant. I'm bringing it back to life. I started by milling a hole in the bottom for a thumb feed, for a bottom magazine, to make it legal. I milled a hole in the left side, a slot, so I can chuck cases in the left side. And I cut the barrel back to 23 inches. I figured I'd start at 23. I might end up clear down at 19. But this is an ongoing project. This is my first attempt at trying to build from the ground up, turn this thing into an HBR gun. I've never shot HBR in competition. I've never shot HBR, period. I've got a few stacks of targets in, 100-yard targets. I'm going to work and I'm going to try, and if I ever get, if the venue opens up, I hear now that there's a venue opening up to Seattle and then east of Seattle a ways. There's a range up there that's shooting HBR. Now, a couple of the things that I've learned in my newest Odyssey is that I made the first iteration of this too big. That long-necked case I'm calling the Ichabod holds over 50 grains of water, which means I've got 5 more grains to play with, bringing it down. Now the second incarnation of the case, where the neck is cut back to make it more useful looking, brings it down to about 46 or 7 grains of water. So I still have room to play. I could short chamber, I could do some things to bring it down closer to 45. But in the meantime, I'm ripping this thing. I'm shooting it pretty hard. I'm shooting it in the 32 to 3350 node as opposed to the 6BR and the whatever. There were a few guys up here in Gig Harbor, Washington that for years campaigned full-on 308 cases and did just fine. So I figured, I'm going to shoot this thing down to a nub, and then I can back it down closer to the minimum legal or the 30 HBR as time goes on. Not worried about it. But in the meantime, it doesn't shoot. I was going to sit down here in the chair and point it. Screw that. I'm not going to go through this. Trust me, there's no groups. And here's the funny thing. I'm hearkening back to Del Bishop's words, and I'm going, in my brain, the gun wants to shoot. It's doing some weird stuff, and I can't figure it out. So in the last couple of days, I turned the barrel down because it was still quite barrel heavy. I put it in the lathe and I turned the barrel down. We're going to look at that here in just a minute. And I went out and shot it with the new barrel. When I turned the barrel down, I put a sleeve on it, and I bushed it up, and I ran it up to 150 foot-pounds. I severely overclocked it. I shortened up the chamber. I made some new cases. So about 5 of these groups were fired with one set of cases. Then I came to about here, and I decided instead of, no, it was actually through here. It wasn't until I started on this paper that I made a new set of cases. So yeah, I'm on my 3rd set of cases for this. None of them are worn out. It's just that when I short chambered it this last time, I didn't feel like a kneeling and pushing the shoulders back. These few try cases that I started with, then I shot these groups. Let's say I fired these cases 15 times. They're still perfect, ready to go. But the shoulders are a little further ahead. I recut the new chamber. I reset, re-indexed the barrel. I indexed the barrel to a center line. I turned it down. And in fact, I think there's really nothing, well, there is this to look at here. The grooves just get worse and worse and worse and worse. They kind of go in a spiral here. Then they go here. This is another day. Then we went here, and I start here, and I start across. I think I had my aiming point right here. I don't remember. I probably had it down here. This is group, 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 and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I changed out the trigger. I stripped the whole gun back down, checked for debris everywhere. Took the trigger out, decided to put a jewel trigger back in it because I had a high dollar trigger in it that I didn't really like anyway. It was a long, slow pull. Felt like going down a ski slope and falling off a bank at the end. So I put a jewel, a brand new jewel, one of the newest production. I have 5 or 6 of them in boxes here. Threw a jewel in there. At about this point here, and I'm shooting, this is actually, there's 7 shots in there. That's a double. It doesn't matter what I was doing. This was a miss. But the stringing's just getting worse and worse and worse. And remember, and it's dawning on me. It's dawning slowly on me. I'm saying the gun, part of me says, okay, what I've said before, and I'll say it again, when a gun's capable of shooting groups this big, when a gun's capable of shooting groups, a 5-shot group with air in it, these are 5s, that's a 5. A group like that means the gun is broken. It's irreconcilable. It's not worth that. That can't be tuned out. That's not that there's a little bit of wind and a little bit of vert. No, that's a busted gun. So, here is the latest iteration. And I'm just going to go through and break down where I'm at on this thing. Because this has been a work in progress, and I have, man, I've come inches away from saying this gun is busted. But the gun is not, cannot be busted. I haven't done anything wrong. It can't not shoot, but it is sucking. It is shooting terribly bad, terribly bad. So, for the 5th time, I ripped it down, and I started, and somewhere in those groups, when it started getting worse and worse and worse, I said, you know, this acts like a bad scope. But this scope right here is a loophole that has been ripped open and epoxied back together. There are no moving parts in this scope except up here. Now, there's a possibility I could have sent this thing to, let's see here. There's a guy who, again, those of you who know him will know him. Those of you who won't, I'm not going to give his name out because I'm a kind of a I just got kicked off another forum. I don't know that anybody wants to have their name associated with me because they find me hard to get along with. So, let's just say that there's a guy out there who makes a specialty sideline of recutting these threads and tightening this up and making a locking mechanism. That's the only thing that hasn't been done. But this scope is bullet-proof. This Bucky's mount here is machined and then machined back. I got it off of a gun and it was all epoxied together. So I disassembled as few pieces as possible. And for instance, these scope rings right here are grooved and epoxied to this flexing rail that you drive the scope with. This had never been apart before. I just took it, the rings had been epoxied, and aligned. Somebody had opened them up. I don't know, some bench rester somewhere was using it. So I left this whole top rail assembly alone. Up here at the front, this right here has got screws in it, and this comes apart. And you have to take this apart to take this rail off of here to even get at the bases. So the bases are bolted down, and this is the only weak link in the system. I had already taken these bases off because these are held on by little 648 screws. These are like factory Remington size screws, rear and front. And so I thought, okay, but I showed you a picture earlier of how I had roughed it up. And I glued it down this last time with this new Marine Tex 3M Fast Cure Marine adhesive, which worked really well for me on aluminum. Long story short, it didn't work so well on here. But I've had these bases off. The first time I took them off, they came off. They'd been on there for years. I epoxied them down, so the next time I had to heat them off. And then this last time I used the 3M stuff, and it peeled off. It was hard, but I didn't have to do anything weird, and I got it cleaned back up with methyl ethyl ketone. So I'm going to say I do not recommend that 3M adhesive for holding scope bases down. So right now, this thing is it's epoxied on every joint. I've stripped it, scraped it, scratched it, soaked it in methyl ethyl ketone, roughed up every surface, and I'm starting from scratch again. But I think I did find not only a problem, but I'm thinking it's the problem. And the only reason I'm doing this episode is because I've decided, just because I'm a cocky dick, I'm going to do what I've been doing. I'm going to make a prediction and then go out and try to make it come true. If I was halfway bright, I would have got this thing fixed, shot some groups, showed you some groups, and said, hey, we fixed it. But I also realized that I'm in a situation out here in the sticks at the end of a long road. I could be editing, I could be faking, I could be whatever. So I'm telling you right now, when I come back, this Revenant's going to be shooting some dots. I know the load range parameters now. I got nothing that shoots. I know my jam lengths. I know all the load workup. I've got cases here. My ubiquitous 3-case thing. These cases have been fired probably 15 times. They haven't grown at all. They measure 2 inches flat on the nose. You'll notice that it's got more lines in the chamber than is normal with any of my guns. And I believe that that's because of that unsupported reamer. I reamed that chamber out by hand, scrubbed it out with the new reamer, and I buried it in such a way. This is the old chamber here, and this is the new cut back here to fatten it out so that it works. But these cases are sizing and working just fine. These 5, and again, I've got 2 of them marked with black. So I'm kind of sharing this stuff so that some of you may find it useful, some of you may not. I got the 2 blacks. So when I go back, and what I've been doing here, my whole plan has still been to work up loads, but I can't get the gun to shoot. I can't get any loads. This is the box of cases that I made. These are neck turned, unfire formed. And in the next phase, I will be fire forming these. Because to set these up, these all need to be fired a couple of times to be ready for match work if I'm going to use this thing in a match, which is the ultimate goal here. So what I found was, and this is why I'm doing exactly what I'm doing, I'm going through and saying I've got some cases now. I've got these cases that have fired over half of those groups that are up, and those are all 5-shot groups, by the way. You'll notice that this last run right here, there's 5 in every one of those. No, there's not. I'm lying to you. I am lying to you. That's a 2 and a 3 as I'm coming around. I saw that's a 2 and a 3 and a 2 and a 3. So I am lying. There's another 2. Those are not 5-shot groups. So these cases have probably in aggregate only been fired 10 times. I'm still a little excited here from what I found. But suffice it to say, I've been going through this thing inch by inch, ounce by ounce. This is the new barrel contour. As you can see, I cut a bunch of this out here. The gun now balances right where it should. I'm fixing things. This is the big old sleeve that I put on here. That is 680 on there. That's a step in the barrel. A little bit hard to see. If I can get it turned a little bit. But that step in the barrel is such that it turns out, and as I said, as is normal for me, every step of the way is a fight. This action, it turns out, is an 1.42" action. It's not the normal 1.35", so I had to go make up another set of blocks. The reason this has to be removable is because for me to put 150 pounds on this, I can't use the rear entry action wrench. This is what a good rear entry action wrench looks like. And they bend. This one has been bent. Can't get enough stress coming in from the rear entry to tighten this to 150 foot-pounds. Can't put enough torque on it. So I have to be able to remove this. So at one point I'm going to pin these down, but that's neither here nor there. Right now they're epoxied down because I've got a barrel in here that's only got about 300 or 400 rounds through it. Should be good for testing. Should be good for setting this thing up, getting it ready for the final chamber. So I have the 150 foot-pound ring collar here. And I've double checked it. I pulled the barrel. I checked for, I have gone through everything but this scope. I can't do anything with this scope because it's locked, frozen, solid. So then I went to the mount and I just went beast. But I disassembled the mount and for the first time I took the rings off of it. Come to find out, this front ring was not only broken loose, but when I went to, let's just say that something rattled as I was taking things apart, so I started moving parts, and this front ring was actually movable. It was moving up and down. It had play in it. So I took these rings off. As you can see, they are now marked. They didn't used to be. I now have them epoxied. I'm redoing the guy's epoxy. But the bottom line is this front ring this whole time has had the 2 screws in the bottom have been loose. It's just been rattling. The scope's been sitting and flexing on this. The only reason this thing didn't fall off its perch is because it's been nailed there. It was being held by the rear ring. So all of this time I've built cases, I've learned some things, but it has not shot a group. So now we be go shoot us some groups. See you on the next one.